Hello everyone. In this lecture, we will discuss a very interesting problem of image classification. We have already seen the classification task in the previous lectures where you have been given a set of independent variables, and on the basis of that you have to predict the corresponding dependent variable, which is y, and it might have a fixed number of values. It could be yes or no, it could be true, false, or 2 3 classes, 5 classes, 10 classes are possible, but the input is a number, numeric. However, in the case of image classification, we have images as the input and we want to predict the corresponding class related to that image. So as you can imagine, the data here is not structured or well defined in the form of a table, but it is rather an image. So we need to somehow process that image according to the pixel values that it contains and predict the final class. Let's see how we can do the same using both the approaches. Both approaches here refers to the traditional machine learning approach and then the deep learning approach. So in the previous lecture, we discussed about what do we mean by deep learning. We also discussed why it has become so famous in recent times. And we also discussed at various points, from various point of views, what is the difference between deep learning and machine learning. In this lecture, we will discuss what do we mean by image classification. Then we will discuss the traditional approach of image classification, where first image is taken, converted into the structured format in the form of a vector. And finally, we will see deep learning based convolutional neural networks to classify the set of images. Now, in traditional classification problems, we have the set of independent variables, which is x, and then we have the corresponding set of variables, which is y. So y here is the dependent variable. So we have x1, for example, here, x2 example here. X2 refers to temperature, and then we have the corresponding classes, either yes or no. However, in the case of image classification, the input is an image and the corresponding class could be, in this specific example, either yes or no. So the question that we want to solve in this specific case is whether the given image is of a dog or not. So the answer is either yes or no. So sometimes you will find the images of dog and the answer should be yes in those cases. Sometimes you will find a not dog, in this case cat, the answer should be no. And then the objective is to, given some unseen image, you have to predict whether it is a dog or not. In many ways, it is similar to the traditional classification problem. However, the difference is that the input is not the numeric columns as we do in the case of traditional machine learning, but here the input is an image. I hope all of you already know that any image actually is stored as its pixel values. So if you will open this image up using some library or other tool, you will see the values of the pixels that make this image. So ultimately in computer, whatever we are storing is in the form of numbers. So this image actually also contains numbers, that is pixel values, behind the scenes. This is another example of image classification where you have been given this huge set of faces, and on the basis of the image of a face, you want to put that into a specific category. Either that face represents the angry emotion, disgusted, fearful, happy, neutral, sad, or even surprised. So it is a multi-class classification problem, as because given an image, it can fall in any one of these categories. But once again, it is image classification and the data is not well structured, available in the form of a table. So if we go by the traditional approach, this is what we do. We somehow take this problem statement, do the feature engineering, and convert that into a structured format with which the traditional machine learning approaches are familiar, and finally supply this data to the machine learning algorithms. Then an obvious question is how we can convert this given data into this structured format. Let's try to understand this first. As we know that any image is either it could be a grayscale image or it could be a colored image. Let's assume that the data set that we are having of images is a 20 by 20 pixel image. That is, if the image is this, it is made up of many pixels where we have 20 pixels in this direction and 20 pixels in this direction. So overall, we have 400 pixels. Now, if we consider each pixel as a separate independent variable, and we laid this image as a vector, whole vector, then we will have these many independent variables, total 400. Once again, why? Because a 20 by 20 image is ultimately represented with 400 pixels. Now, since it is a grayscale image, any pixel can have the value between 0 to 255, where 0 represents a black value and 255 represents a white value, and all the values in between represent the gray shades. Finally, for a given image, when we stretch that out as a vector of 400 independent variables, each corresponding to one pixel, then after putting these values of the pixels, the corresponding class could be 1 to represent, yes, this is a dog, or for some other images, when we laid down the values like this, then the answer could be 0, that the given image does not represent a dog. So this is how we take the image data set and convert that into a form, the standard classification problem format, where the standard machine learning algorithms like logistic regression and others can be applied on this dataset. Moreover, if the given image is a colored image, then even if it is a 20 by 20 pixel image, in a colored image, each pixel is described by 3 values further. That is, what are the RGB values for each pixel? It means that one pixel in a color image contains 3 different values. One is for R value. R here represents the value of the red color in that pixel, the portion of green color in that pixel, and the blue one. So if it is a 20 by 20 image, which means overall it has 400 pixels and each pixel is represented by 3 values further of R, G and B, that is red, green and blue. So overall values become 1200. So in this case, when the image is colored, when we stretch our image in the form of a vector, we might have more values than the grayscale image. In this specific case, the total number of variables are 1200. The rest of the process is same. For an image, we will stretch it like this, and then we will see what is the corresponding class. In this specific case, the class is dog. For certain image, the class can also be 0. Once again, this is the way we convert an image data set into the standard structured format where the traditional machine learning algorithms can be applied. However, in the case of deep learning, we do not artificially feed pixel values to classification data format as we have done previously. Rather, we take the raw image of a dog or some other animal as the input directly into the deep learning model, and the output is the classification result. This process of just supplying the raw input, in this case raw image, and getting the desired output, this process is called end-to-end learning. And this is why deep learning has become famous in recent times. We need not to do artificial feature engineering here. We just supply the raw input, whether it is image or speech or audio, and we expect the deep learning model to give us good result. What it has done is it has simplified the overall workflow where pre-processing steps have been either simplified or have been removed altogether. In the case of image classification, CNNs are the preferred choices, and the primary reason is that CNNs can capture complex patterns within the image and can identify the relationships between the different segments of the image very effectively. So for this class, we will discuss how we can use CNN in order to solve the same problem of identifying whether the given image is a dog or not. So what is a convolutional neural network? Let's try to discuss that first. It is a deep neural network mostly applied to analyzing the images, and it has just revolutionized the field of computer vision. It can achieve remarkable accuracy for tasks such as image and video recognition, image classification, and others. The architecture of a CNN is specifically designed to automatically learn the spatial features from the input images. Now, when we say spatial feature, it is the space-related feature. So the spelling is this, and it means features that reside in space of an image. So these features refer to the fact that at the very lowest level of pixels, which is identified by the initial level or initial layers of the network, CNN learns the basic or simple patterns that do not necessarily make sense to us initially, such as where are the different edges in the images, where are the different corners, what are the textures in an image. But as we move forward in the in this convolutional neural network further to the intermediate level, these low level features are combined together to form mid-level features, we call them. And these mid-level features might represent shapes such as circles, rectangles, or even parts of the object such as wheels of a car, eyes of a human being, or leaves of a tree. Now, as we move from these mid-level features to the highest level features, we might make sense of the complete image, and we might try to grasp what are the different concepts in the image, such as by combining different identifiable objects, we can make the completely recognizable entities such as dogs or cars or trees, or even the complex arrangements of these objects, such as a person riding a bicycle, etc. Remember that all of this process is automatic in CNNs. That is the process from low level to high level feature learning. It explains actually how CNNs build a hierarchical understanding of images by starting with the simple patterns and combining them into more complex representations. In this way, CNNs actually mimic a form of visual processing that is somewhat similar to how we humans interpret visual information. This hierarchical approach allows CNN to learn to recognize a wide variety of objects and scenes from raw pixel data. Using these space related features, we are calling them spatial features. And this is how the CNN works. Now, in order to understand how we can use deep learning to implement image classification, it is important to know what are the different layers or components are there in a CNN model. Usually, you will find these terms and these components coming up in any CNN architecture very commonly. So let's start with the first one, that is the convolutional layer. So convolutional layers are the core building blocks of a CNN. These layers apply a number of what we call filters, sometimes also called kernels, to the input image to create feature maps. Now these filters are small in spatial dimension, width and height, but extend through the full depth of input image. So primarily the role of these kernels is to detect patterns such as edges, colors or textures. So if you have an image like this, which is made up of obviously multiple pixels, then a filter or kernel is usually applied to a set of pixels like this, and it applies the operation on this whole part. This is a combination of these pixels put together. Now for the next iteration, this kernel might move like this horizontally, and this time consider these set of pixels. So it goes box by box through the whole image, identifying the edges, the colors and textures in the image. Another important point in the case of CNN is the type of activation functions which are used. As I told you earlier, in the era of deep learning, we have new activation functions also. So once a filter is applied to the input image, an activation function is typically applied to introduce non-linearity into the model. The most common activation function in this regard is what we call ReLU activation function. ReLU stands for rectified linear unit. The benefit of this is it is very computationally easy to apply a ReLU function in comparison to the other standard activation functions such as tanh function. Now after that, we usually have pooling layers coming up. So we have convolution layer, then we apply activation function. Afterwards, we have pooling layers. Now pooling is used to reduce the dimensionality of each feature map by retaining the most important information. So it is a way of reducing the size of the feature map, or we should use a more generalized word, that is resizing the feature map. There are many types of pooling layers. The most common is max pooling layer. So we have the max pooling layer, but sometimes we also use the average pooling layer. After that, another important component is the flattening layer or flattened layer. This layer is used as a bridge actually between the convolutional pooling layers and the other layers called fully connected or dense layers. Now what it does is it converts the multi-dimensional output of convolutional layers into a one-dimensional array. That's why the name flattening layer. Convolutional layers are often multi-dimensional in nature, even after applying the pooling operation, and it needs to be converted into a standard layer in the artificial neural network. This flattening process is necessary because fully connected layers expect input as a one-dimensional array of features. Essentially, the flattening layer reshapes the output from the convolutional layers to a format that is suitable for input into the fully connected layers or dense layers. After that, we have the fully connected layers, also called the dense layers. After several convolutional and pooling operations, the high level reasoning actually in the neural network is done through fully connected layers. So you can consider it like this. Convolutional layer and pooling layers, they try to learn the basic level features, but when that is done through several convolutional and pooling layer operations, it is the time to do the higher level reasoning, and for that we use fully connected layers. Neurons in a fully connected layer have connections to all activations in the previous layer, as seen in the regular neural networks. Their role is to output predictions from the network. We often sometimes use dropout layers. Also, dropout layer is a regularization technique, and it is used to prevent overfitting in neural networks. Now, during the training, the dropout layer randomly sets a fraction of input units to 0, effectively dropping them out from the network temporarily. This random removal helps to break up unsuitable correlations in the training data that the network might learn. Now, by doing the dropout operation, it forces the network to learn from more robust features that are useful. Dropout is typically applied before or even after dense layers within the CNN architecture, but it can also be used between convolutional layers, especially if the neural network is relatively large. Normalization layers are also used sometimes, that's why they are optional. And these layers, such as batch normalization is one of them, may be used within CNNs to make the training process more stable and faster. So these normalization layers play a very important role in stabilizing and accelerating the training process. They do this by normalizing the inputs of each layer in such a way that they have a mean of 0 and a standard deviation of 1, or might enforce other types of statistical stability also. So these are some of the common building blocks, we should say, or components of a convolutional neural network architecture. So once you design a CNN, often you will find a picture like this. So usually the image is supplied to the convolution layer where the filter is applied, then some pooling layer is applied, then often we also apply the normalization, then we also apply some dropout rate to the latest layer so far. Often you will see that these type of operations are repeated multiple times. That's why we have written it as a one convolutional block. The output of this block is supplied to the next block, which is arranged in the similar fashion, starting from convolutional to pooling to batch normalization, and once again the dropout. Now, before making the final predictions, as you can see, it is multi-dimensional in nature, these layers. So they need to be flattened out in order to make them like a regular layer of the neural network. So first we apply the flattening operation, and then its input is supplied to the fully connected layer, or we call the dense layer. We further applied some dropout operation, and then one more fully connected layer and finally it goes to the output. Remember, here the output has 8 classes, so it is a multi-class classification problem architecture. You can imagine that the problem statement goes like this, that given the image, identify whether this is the image of a dog or cat or some other animal, let's say 8 animals. Now, identifying this right set of composition of different layers is a very tedious task in convolutional neural network and in other deep neural networks also. So for that, we often resort to the previously well-established architectures which have given us good results for different problems. We go back to them, we study them, we see how they have, researchers have laid them out. We study from that. And once we have enough intuition about how we should place these layers, different components, different types of layers, we can actually design very powerful and very efficient convolutional neural networks. But initially, it is very difficult to come up with the right combination of layers with their right values and their specific arrangement. So broadly, the working of CNNs can be divided into 2 categories. As we have discussed earlier, in the initial level, CNNs learn to recognize basic features such as ages and simple texture, and in deep layers, the network can combine these features together to detect more complex patterns. And in the final layers, CNNs can use the learned feature to classify the input image into various categories depending upon the training dataset. In comparison to the standard deep neural networks, advantages of CNN include parameter sharing and sparsity of the connections. Parameter sharing refers to the fact that since we are using a filter or kernel that is useful in one part of the image, is probably useful across the entire image. This significantly reduces the number of parameters in the network in comparison to the standard deep neural networks. Also, in each layer, each output value depends on a smaller set of inputs, making the overall architecture computationally efficient. So in this lecture, we discuss about the image classification, and in many different types of applications, it might find its use. Traditional approach to image classification requires that you need to take the image and convert that into the standard tabular format, but it does not perform well in complex tasks. CNN-based deep neural networks are more efficient and often gives better result than traditional approach, especially when we are trying to identify complex patterns in the images. In the next class, we will try to explore one image classification problem with the help of both the paradigms, the traditional approach as well as the deep learning based approach, and then we will compare to both of them. So we will try to implement that with the help of Python and with the help of a lot of inbuilt libraries. So this is all about this lecture. Thank you.